Hi everyone, welcome. Really excited to be welcoming Charlotte Pulver to this webinar today, Reclaiming Water Guardianship. The webinar is in celebration of our upcoming course, Wisdoms of Water, an exploration of mythology, memory, and freedom, which brings together many leading teachers, healers, researchers, activists, and artists to explore the spiritual realms of water and the memories that it holds. The idea of the course is to explore how our lives are connected with water in many ways. From bodies to oceans, rivers, blood, water's everywhere, a connector, healer, facilitator. And so to understand what water means indicates an understanding of our existence, where we are and where we're going. So in the webinar today, we're going to look at the importance of reclaiming ancestral water traditions and understanding their importance in our contemporary world, which is increasingly drifting away from them. So we're going to be joined and led by Charlotte Pulver, who was born into a family line of apothecarians and is deeply rooted in the ancestral traditions of the British Isles. Charlotte has dedicated her life to the guardianship and celebration of water and has a rich background in hosting water ceremonies and pilgrimages in the UK. She's currently crafting a book on London springs and wells while co-founding the Fellowship of the Spring, which is a group committed to preserving water heritage. Charlotte, in the webinar today, will share an ancient North myth about the well of memory, which communicates the profound essence of water and the role of humanity in upholding the balance of water as well as all of life. We're going to look at how ancestral traditions have been oppressed and erased, and why reconnecting with them is a revolutionary act. We'll also touch on the relationship between the ecological, civic, and spiritual, and Charlotte will share her own personal experience with water guardianship, as well as how each of us can take action in our own lives. To start off, Charlotte, I would love to invite you to set the scene and tell us the story of the well of memory.
Oh, thank you so much, Ruby and Advaya, for inviting me to come to this table with you all today and to tell this tale of the well of memory. So this is an old Norse myth, and myths don't belong to one author. They are timeless. They are maps which are relevant for any time, any generation. So in telling this tale, it's going to give us lots of clues to do with water guardianship and what actually water is. And this tale was passed on to me by a Norse teacher called Andreas Kornova. And I actually met Andreas many years ago, but how this tale came to be in my hands and in my heart, as I met him in the middle of London, 2019, during a protest, and he had this massive Norse iron wand in his hand, as you do in the middle of a protest. And he came up to me because he knew that I worked with water, and he said to me, "Charlotte, did you know water is time?" And I'm like, "Oh, tell me more, Andreas." He's like, "I need to share this story with you." So that's how it came to be. Okay, so wherever you are in the world right now, I invite you just to, get really, really comfy, whether that's in your chair or lie back on your sofa or on your bed. This is a time of entering into sacred time together, tonight or the daytime, wherever you are in the world. And allow yourself to really relax and receive this story. For myths talk to the deeper parts of our minds, to our unconscious. They touch the deeper senses of our bodies and touch our own well of memory within our own bodies. Myths form ripples in our hearts like droplets, so may it unravel various memories and rememberings that you know within yourself. This story may evoke feelings and understandings that you already knew, you just forgot them. Okay, so let me introduce you to the world tree, within the Norse cosmos. And for this tree, this world tree, was called Yggdrasil. Yggdrasil, the translation of it means Odin's horse, or the tree of Odin. For those who know about the runes or have heard about the runes, a divinatory practice of reading Norse glyphs, well, this is the tree that Odin hung himself from to receive this divinatory language. And it was from Yggdrasil that he hung himself. Okay, so Yggdrasil holds all the 9 realms of the Norse cosmos. But today we're going to be taking a journey deep into the underworld, into the roots of the tree. For within the tree lives the most profound spring that you should ever come across, often called the well of memory or the well of destiny. For this tree's purpose and potential is completely fused with this well of memory. It cannot reach its highest potential, its purpose on this planet, without being infused with these springs' waters. And the well of memory cannot truly fulfill its purpose without the tree itself. They are in complete divine union together, in a balance of reciprocity. They are not alone. They are literally married to each other. And this is a concept, yes, it is within myth, but actually all the trees of our planet today have a very profound interrelationship with water. And without the trees, waters cannot fulfill its highest potential, which is to feed all of life through the conduction from the trees. So this spring, the well of memory, which resides in the roots of Yggdrasil, it is like no other spring that you have ever seen. It is glistening, it is golden, it is that kind of water that you have been seeking your whole life to ever behold and drink from, if you are dared given the opportunity to sup from its water droplets. And presiding the well of memory are 3 guardians of the well. They are called the Norns, otherwise also known as the Sisters of the Weird. And when I say weird, I mean W-Y-R-D, for this is the root word which our word that we use all the time, weird, comes from. But the weird that the Sisters of the Weird, they are weaving the fabric of reality day and night and day. They weave a web of the weird, of both past, present, and future together. And they weave this web with the water droplets from the well of memory itself. The Norns are giantesses. They live within the realms of the gods. Let me introduce you to them. The Norn who sits on the seat of the past. Her name is Udr. She is woman who has become. She is holding all the hearts and all the breath of all the ancestors who have become on this planet. She holds them dearly in her heart and in her hands. She touches the waters. She touches the waters in the past. When she touches the well of memory, she is weaving the thread of the ancestors. Let me introduce you to the Norn who weaves the thread in the present. Her name is Verdandi, woman who is becoming. She is becoming constantly in the unfolding moment. But when she touches the well of memory, She is immediately touching the past, connecting to the thread of Ud's hand. But when you touch water in the present moment, you are immediately in contact with the past. For water never disappears. It is forever unfurling, enfolding, and recycling itself. For the water that we have in the present moment, right now, is the water which has always been here since the beginning of this planet's formation. Let me introduce you to the non who holds the seeds of the future, who weaves with the water droplets from the present unfolding moment into the potential future. Her name is Skuld, but if ever you were to come across and lay your head at the feet of Skuld, you will never see her. She always holds a veil upon her face. We are never to really see the future. It is always changing in the unfolding moment. The future is never to be seen so clearly. Because of the nature of the reality is life is always unfolding in the present moment. Potential is always changing. So Skuld weaves the threads from the present moment in the unfolding moment, ripples into the future is just of the potential. So when we touch water in the present moment, here today, we are immediately in touch with the past, threads of the past. Touching the water in the present moment, we are affecting how water flowers and forms into the future. We affect how it structures and what balance and where that water goes. So day and night, the Norns, they are tending to the well of memory. And with the water droplets, they take the water droplets and they combine them with the clay in which Yggdrasil, the world tree, is held in. The clay and the minerals and all the soil. And they combine it and form it into an ambrosia and roll it together and tend to the roots day and night and day, to the broken roots of the world tree, to the fractured roots, to the oozing roots. They tend and mend with this ambrosia formed by the water droplets of the well of memory and the soil. For this is their service to all life. You see, the whole of creation is held, and the balance of creation is held in the hands of the Norns. These waters, the well of memory's waters, they are from the place of the gods, which flower through all of humanity and all of creation, and all the animals and all the plants are fed by these waters. But these waters return to the well of memory every morning, and it's the Norns who collect it. And they collect it in the morning dew, which forms upon the tree's leaves. And there's this haste to go and collect the morning dew before the sun burns it into the sky and those water droplets disappear. And those water droplets only form by humans remembering, by the memory of humans that these water droplets form. And they collect these dewdrops, these crystalline little crystal dewdrops on the tree's leaves, and feed them back into the well of memory, feeding it back every morning, to restore the balance of creation. And there's like a haste, like I said, in collecting these morning dew, because the Norns have, in their own way, almost been forgotten, those who are the guardians of the well. And they have this sense that there will be a time when those water droplets won't be there anymore because the humans have entered a place of deep forgetting. So I'm going to share with you a central teaching within this story about memory and water. So the Norn of the future, the woman who is yet to become, her name Skuld translates as debt, the word debt. And I don't mean a Western, understanding of debt of, you're owing money, or you have minus £100 in your bank account, or whatever it is. It's not about that. The sacred understanding and the ancestral understanding of debt in this story is for a wild tree to be fed in balance, and for the world's waters to flower and form and restructure into beautiful crystalline energy to feed all life and to feed the world tree itself and all of creation. How that water is coming into balance and formation is by remembering the past, remembering where we've come from, and making a debt, a payment, an offering from your heart. The highest offering is from your heart to your ancestors. And I'm talking about the ancestors of your blood and bone, for all the ancestors which line up behind you, both in breadth and width, all those ancestors who have breathed you into being in this miraculous occurrence of being here today, but also the ancestors of river and stone, for those beings or those trees or those waters or those animals which were familiar to you in the place of your birth. They are the ones who also held you and still hold you today and have breathed you into being, for it's the earth who feeds you every day with all your sustenance. So it's making that daily offerings to both threads of ancestors. And it's also to do with feeling. For when we feel, we are able to heal. And when we have the capacity to grieve and shed those tears, they go back and are the ultimate sustenance into the well of memory. The thing is, we're born into a culture which has millennia of unresolved grief and oppression and destruction in all our ancestral lines. And if we have the capacity to open our hearts and feel and come into right relationship with our fellow kin, then that helps heal the web of the weird and helps us to remember and feel, and for all those memories to restructure as dew on the tree of life. Humanity's, should we say, is vital in the balance of the tree of life, of our remembering, is vital for things to be in reciprocity and balance with all of creation. So, it's a very beautiful story, and it has so many so many gifts of medicine and teachings about what water is. So the Norns, the three Norns, are like holding the different threads of time. So in science itself, they sometimes they say water is quantum, water is time, and I love that this story holds that. So honestly, like if you've got some water in your cup right now next to you that you might be drinking, just like place your hands on it. This water, honestly, is the same water that has been with us since the beginning of the planet's formation. There's something called the water cycle. And the water is constantly cycling. It never disappears. And so when we touch water in the present, you are physically touching the past, from whence that water has come from. But the thing is that water has come from the beginning of this planet's formation. So you can actually, if you think about it, you're touching the beginning moment of this planet's formation. And you are, in some ways, touching and in contact with all the peoples who have touched that water, the ancestors. So a lot of people say, what is a wonderful ancestral practice? And I'm just like, literally, just go to your local springs or your rivers or even just your tap water and just touch it with that reverence of, wow, I am in contact with the past and where it's come from. And then as you're touching it in the present moment, you're in contact with that past, but you are affecting the future of how that water flowers and forms. You're affecting its potential. And the future is always about potential. It's not clear cut. We can't know the potential. We can't know exactly what's going to happen in the future. And a lot of indigenous cultures say that, we can't read the future, but we can affect its potential because everything is in potential. Everything is unfolding.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. I loved hearing you talk and speak about to tell the story and how through story can convey so much more than you could just in like a normal talk or through in a more rational approach to conveying information or communicating. And it's like that's so the message of the myth as well, and what you're talking about now with water and how water destabilizes our ideas of time in this dominant world that we're living, dominant paradigm destabilizes our idea of time, and it destabilizes our ideas of ancestrality and the past, because it brings the past into the present and the future into the present, which is one of the big messages that I got from when you were telling the story. And I was reflecting also about your work personally, in the sense of reviving ancestral traditions and working with ancestral traditions, and how through that, in the same way as through water, you're bringing the past back into the present again and honoring everything that's come before in a way that is honoring then the present and honoring life itself. And then I was thinking about the way that the dominant paradigm, the materialist paradigm that we live in, or capitalism, consumerism, whatever we want to call it, has always had an agenda to maintain the other side of that, to maintain an idea of linearity, that you're not connected with the past, that you are you don't have that sense of empowerment or connection, and there's an effect of this dominant way of being, which is a disconnect. So you're no longer connected to your ancestors. You're not connected to your place. You're not connected to each other or to the sense of the sacred. And thinking about how sacred sites have been affected in this, as well as this memory, as well as the traditions, and how you've been working a lot with wells, and particularly thinking about also the Stonehenge project that's been happening in the UK now. And I wonder if we switch to talking about water guardianship and why your work has centered so much on reviving ancestral traditions, recognizing sacred sites, recognizing this role of water in who we are and who we need to be, and in our relationship with land and place. I wondered if you wanted to talk a bit about that.
Yeah, I loved how what you distilled and extracted from listening to that story. I love that. Beautiful. So, why water guardianship? It's not something we choose. We just follow what feels right in our heart and what we love, and actually what we're seeking and what we need help with. And water is a conduit and a support for feeling our emotions and of safety. We were born in amniotic fluid in water, and I think that's why you'll see that in many cultures it's the feminine presence which is the guardian of waters. We have the sea gods, but it's really the feminine principle. And what you said about the current paradigm of not wanting to look to the past, not wanting to for us to like revere our ancestors, I feel that's really to cut us off from our feelings. And that whole story talks about is like the world tree is going to wither and die if humans aren't in touch with their feelings and grieving and remembering. Because in that grieving and healing and remembering, it allows us to be in our bodies and to heal. Otherwise, how can we transform our trauma, as individuals and as a culture? And when we are in a traumatized place, what tends to happen is this illness of consumerism. We trash our homes. We're the only species who does that. And you only do that when you don't feel like you belong. When you feel like you belong to a place, or like you like to go to your nearby spring or your rivers or your oceans because you feel like you belong to those places and they belong to you, you take care of them. You're not going to be constantly outside yourself needing to buy things and, try and like heal that numbness and pain inside. So for me, like most of my life so far, I don't live in London anymore, but for 30 years I lived in London. And it was a serendipitous moment. Like from the age of like 10, I lived in London, and I would go outside of London to seek the sacred sites and the springs and, go on adventures trying to find them. And actually it was one day I was just trying to find the postcode of some place to send a card to my friend, and I knew she lived next to this church. So I went online and I looked up the postcode, and this church, I was on its website, it said, "Oh, St. Mary's Holy Spring is inside the church in Willesden." And I was just like, what? There's a spring in London? Why haven't I thought of this? It was just like, I've been so thinking it was outside the metropolis. And I was like, okay, I got to go and see the spring immediately. So I went to the church. It was open. The priest happened to be around. And I was like, hey, I really want to see your spring. Can I drink from it? And he was so excited that I'd made this trek across London to visit his spring. And I drank from the water, and he told me all about it, where it comes up through the crypt, and that the crypt like floods sometimes. And I drank the water, and I had this like light bulb moment. I was like, okay, now it's time to find all the springs in London. And so that's what I did. And why I did that, especially in the city, is it helped keep me grounded. It helped make me feel safe and felt like I belonged to the city, to this deeper intelligence, which is water. And, I came to understand that like London is a water city. It's actually on top of a lake called the London Basin. Through London is 21 rivers. Now they're all underground. And from those rivers, there's lots of springs, which, which form these rivers. And there's wells, and some of them are above ground and you can visit them. And some of them are capped, or pretty much all the main places of power on top of the springs, and you can't have access to them. So I just mapped them all out, and I guess it was part of my healing of feeling safe in the city and connected and emotionally centered. And it was by doing that, that it's how it really came into play. And I guess London was my training ground. And am I answering your question?
Yeah, you are. I think we've got a map of your springs.
Okay, let's do it. Let's go into the photos and I'll just talk amongst them all. This is just inner city London. Like I couldn't do a screenshot of the whole of London. So I just started mapping them out, and you see like the lines. Those are various rivers, which all the springs are connected to. And you'll see that some are literally on the rivers, and all these rivers flow into the River Thames. I can give you the link to this map, which explains what the springs are and where they are. And I formed a Facebook group where like people who are like spring geeks and water geeks of London can share their knowledge. Okay, so then I started becoming very connected to a wider group of people. There's a Facebook group called Holy Springs of Britain. And like we've literally mapped out through the whole of the UK. And this is just one example. This is just Cornwall for you. You know, Cornwall is so full of wells, but I can give you like all the links to all the different, you know, counties in the UK, which has all the springs. And the main person who did that, I need to really recognize him. His name's Andy Norfolk. He's just obsessed with mapping springs, and I love him for that. Okay, so this is a deeper story. So this is a spring where I now live. I live in the woods in Hastings. St. Helens Woods is where I live. And this is my local spring, St. Helens Spring. It's quite a tale how I found this spring. I'll tell it very briefly, and because it will tell you when you really align yourself with a spring, it can hold you in so many ways. So the first part of my, should we say, more of my water guardianship really started in London, which I, you know, shared a bit with you and mapping everything out. And then we'd go to the various springs and just naturally host ceremony with the springs in London. And then like a few years later, I found myself inside Stonehenge, as you do on the summer solstice. And there's this stone, which is that outer perimeter stone. It's not the inner part of the henge, but this stone is in alignment with the summer solstice sunrise. And if you want to make your prayers on the summer solstice sunrise, you go to this stone. And one of the names for this stone is called the Hele stone. That is Hele. Today, it's often just called the heel stone, Heel. But the oldest name for this stone is called the Hele stone. So you go there to pray. And what happens is when the sun is rising and if the sky is clear, when it hits the stone, that stone will form a shadow on the ground and snake itself all the way into the inner sort of chamber of the henge and kind of pierce the center where an altar stone used to be. So it's kind of like this fertility snake of a shadow snaking itself in and then out. And this happens on the summer solstice sunrise. So you go to this stone to pray, and because it's in alignment with the sun, the sunrise. So I went there to make my prayers, and I didn't really have any fixed form prayers of what it was going to be, why I was going to Stonehenge that morning. But what arose from me as I prayed as the sun was coming up was I wished to connect more deeper to the waters of the British Isles. And when I got home that night, I looked on Facebook, as you do, and popped this image of this amazing spring this image that I'm sharing with you by a man called Mark Golding. And he was telling his tale of how he found this spring and how it was covered in a swamp in the woods and it had been lost for decades, and how he dug it out of the ground. And something told me, this is the answer to your prayer that you made at Stonehenge. And then I also saw that there was an alignment between the name St. Helen and the name of the stone I made my prayer, which was at the Hele stone. So Hele is one of the names for Helen, okay? It's an old name. And the predecessor goddess to St. Helen, because you have the goddesses which were here before the Christianization of these wells, is Ellen, Elen. So this site would have been worshipped to the goddess Ellen. And the goddess Ellen, her name, means shining light. She is the goddess of the trackway. So people would call upon her if you're feeling lost in life. And like you're lost in the woods or you're feeling lost internally. So you go to these waters to bathe if you need like guidance of a direction in your life, or you need your internal trackways cleared out. So I was just like, this is the answer. I need to bathe in these waters. Anyway, 6 months later, I did visit this spring and bathed in the waters. Wasn't expecting, I didn't go with any expectations, but my whole life changed after bathing in these springs. I tell you, like within a year, I left a 13-year relationship. We sold our house. I sold all my businesses. It was just like all this huge change. And I knew it was from like literally immersing myself in these waters. All this change happened, but I was I was seeking this change. I just didn't know how I was gonna make it happen. But anyway, thankfully it happened, despite it being quite quite chaotic, which comes with change. And this was my temple to go to. This was the spring I would go to kind of find my alignment if I needed support and to get revived from being in the London. I would always go to the spring. It was my place to go to escape from the city. Okay, so this is the map. So basically, when I saw the photo of the spring, I emailed the man who shared that image, Mark Golding. I was like, hey, Mark, I'd love you to show me the spring. He's like, I won't show you the spring. I'll give you a map. Here's the map. So he hand drew this like little treasure map. He's like, go find it. I'm like, okay. So this is a map that I still give to people today if they ever want to find it. So I used this beautiful map. Okay, that was me on the day that I decided to bathe in it. And then that's Mark. That's Mark who dug out the spring. And okay, and this is in London. So, you know, I said that like there's springs that you can see and drink from. And then there's springs which are underground, which are capped, which you might not know about. But when I started to map them out, I then knew which were the potholes where the springs were. So this is in Hyde Park, in the area where the fountains are. And yeah, I even like went down it. And honestly, down there is like the remnants of an old bathing well, and you can still see the water. And because I did all the mapping, this spring, St. Anne's Well, is connected to the River Westbourne, which then flows through Hyde Park and then goes down to Sloane Square and then into the Thames. And then it's just something to share. It's really, really beautiful if you live in a city and you start to map out your springs to the ones which are capped. Because when you stand over them, like, you know, if I just put that cap back on and just stood over it, you can feel like the energy of rushing water below your feet. You can feel like the magnetism of the water. And so you can pray, you know, in the city, like above the capped springs. And pray, and knowing where those prayers flow to the different parts of the city. So it's a very powerful way to connect with nature within the city and knowing where those prayers are taken through the city. So this is a spring called the Strand Spring, or the Roman Bath. This is literally in the centre of London, just around the corner from the Royal Courts of Justice. So you can't really see the water because it's black and white photo, but it's really crystalline water. And it's just such a mystery because this is really in a condensed part of the city. But this water comes all the way from Hampstead Heath, and it's still really pure by the time it gets there. So that's just a little snapshot of my little adventures with water, especially the ones in the city. I find are the most precious jewels. You know, it's just like, wow, you're still here. You know, so that's why I really loved finding the springs in London when I lived there. And, you know, it's not just London. It's like most cities in the world will have their springs. They just need to be found and remembered, because most of them are very forgotten.
Thank you so much, Charlotte, for sharing those photos and those stories. It totally re-enchants your experience of being in a city or anywhere you find yourself, to have the stories and the histories and to recognize that. I wonder if you wanted to share a little bit about pilgrimage as well, and the role of pilgrimage and what you've been doing with the Fellowship of the Spring as well through that.
Yeah, sure. So our ancestors, you know, in all cultures have been practicing pilgrimage, you know, taking walks through the land. And pilgrimage is, I guess, a really simple vessel of transformation. You set off in one place, you know, knowing where your final destination is, but you just let life unfold as you go. And you can set prayers and intentions and let life reflect or back to you what those answers might be, or you can use pilgrimage to transform. But, you know, all the old pilgrimage routes are all following the waterways, you know, because people needed water, people needed to drink the water, or if they had their animals, you know, to for their horses to drink from the waters. Or going back to Neolithic times, people would follow the tracks. Say in the British Isles, it might have been reindeer or big auric, ancient cows through the land. They would follow the tracks, and where the tracks went was always to the waterways. So, our pilgrimage routes are synonymous with water. So when I was just finding the springs essentially within London, I could see there was pilgrimage routes, and you kind of create amazing little quests, little adventures, really. And that's how, for me, it was the waters got me into pilgrimage. But also it was by going to my favorite spring, which is the Ellen Spring in the woods where I live here today. She's the goddess of the trackways. She's the goddess of pilgrimage. And so kind of bathing in her waters and getting direction, because her name means shining light. It opened up that passion. But that passion, I realized, had always been for pilgrimage since I was a kid. I'd always get a map from a very early age and go, I'm going on an adventure. And then I would just leave home and go off.
That's one of the reasons why I'm so excited about the course, Wisdoms of Water course. And I'm so happy that you can take part in it as well. And this idea of bringing together different elders and people working with water who've been researching water, academics around water, spiritual practitioners, people with very practical relationships with water too, scientists, to re-water our realities so that we can really recognize how integral it is and reevaluate how we relate to it, to then hopefully change how we engage with life as a whole, by putting water back at the center. And something that really I was really inspired by, and something else I wanted to mention, when you're talking about the story and how you've been engaging with water and the spiritual practices around water, the ancestral practices, is how fun it can be as well. And how it's a process of learning and exploring and experimenting and finding what suits you also, not something that you have to find in an ancient book and follow word by word. It's almost like a discovery. And that's something that I really got when you're telling your story. But then it's also political. Like we're talking now about like water and memory and ancestry and bringing that into the present. But in that, it becomes like a radical act. It's a political act. And I was thinking about the work that you've been doing around land access, like collaborating with the trespass movement, but also around Stonehenge with the recent attempts to do construction and corporate forces playing a role within that. I would love if you could share a little bit about what you've been doing there with the Stonehenge campaign.
Okay, so I don't know how much is within people's awareness to do with what is called the Stonehenge tunnel. I don't know how much people know about it. It's an issue actually which has been around for like 25 years. The government have been wanting to drill actually a very deep tunnel through the Stonehenge World Heritage Site. So Stonehenge is not just the henge, it's a whole site, World Heritage Site with many sacred sites, and they're all aligned with each other through different ages of our culture, going back to Mesolithic times. So they've, 11,000 years ago, there's archaeologists have found flint-knapped tools from then. So yeah, it's a whole site. And the oldest site itself is what is known as the Stonehenge Spring. The name for it is called Blick Mead. You can look it up. I'd highly recommend looking it up. And when you see photos of it, you'll be like, oh my God. It's this, so basically, I know we don't have much time, but I'm just trying to fill you in as much as I can. So in 2019, I was hearing about this Stonehenge tunnel, and I looked online and I heard the name Blickmead Spring was going to be drastically affected. And obviously being interested in springs, I was like, okay. So I searched Blickmead Spring, and up popped this photo of the spring, and I was just so taken by the energy, this ancient water. and reading about like 200,000 artifacts of flint-napped tools had been found within the spring, and an ancient 10,000-year boat, and the waters are just so crystalline. It's like a very precious place which has really not been affected, thankfully. And I was like, I need to find the spring, and I need to see if I can help in any way. Anyway, I managed to get in contact with the guardian, the owner, because it's on private land, and it's like on an old family estate. But this family, they have given their estate to forming what do you call it? A nursing home. So it's the land of the nursing home, in which I love, like these ancestral waters, and the elders who live on this land in their last parts of their lives are able to be with the spring. Anyway, I introduced myself to the owner, and I told them that I did pilgrimage and I'd love to bring people to the spring, and like a tithe of the pilgrimage tickets we'd always give to the archaeologists so they could pay for their radiocarbon dating of what artifacts they pulled out of the spring. So yeah, I've had this very special relationship with the spring for the last 5 years. And in relation to the tunnel, so this is the oldest site within the Stonehenge World Heritage Site, and the tunnel is going to be bored right next to the spring. So like if the tunnel goes ahead and is bored, then this spring will be no more. And all the artifacts, I mean, there's so many artifacts within this spring, they will be no more, because it's a chalk-fed spring, and it's a very rare environment, and it allows the artifacts to be perfectly preserved, and they've been perfectly preserved for like over 11,000 years, So once that water is drained, all these artifacts won't be able to be radiocarbon dated. They'll like start to disintegrate as well. So the government is aware of this spring, and so is English Heritage, who are for the tunnel. If you want to know why, I can tell you. It's very political, and it's all to do with money as well. They don't care. They don't care that the oldest part of the Stonehenge World Heritage Site will be no more. They just do not care. And the reason why they want this tunnel is that they think it might speed up your journey by like 5 minutes, if that. That's it. To spend a £3 billion tunnel just to speed up your journey by maybe 5 minutes, maybe, and to like destroy the oldest part, which is the spring. And all the artifacts within it. They're so happy to do that, and so is English Heritage. So yeah, it's been a big part of, I guess, my guardianship, is trying to raise the awareness about this place. And English Heritage calls Blickmead, the Stonehenge spring, they call it the cradle of Stonehenge. It's like Stonehenge, the henge itself, only exists because of the spring, because it is the waters which brought people to that part of Salisbury, that part of the UK. The River Avon flows into it, and it attracted all the animals. And actually 11,000 years ago, they realized actually people were starting to make semi-permanent structures, which, next to the waters, because it was such incredible waters, which again changed the rule books for archaeology, that people back then didn't make structures, but they did little homes. So yeah, it's like the most sacred part of Stonehenge World Heritage Site, and I feel very deeply part of the protection of it.
Yeah, thank you, Charlotte. And if people wanted to learn more, is there somewhere where they can go?
Yeah, I'd say there's a website set up by the Stonehenge Alliance.
Cool.
So where it is at right now is the courts ruled in the favour of the government to be able to go ahead and drill it. And that drilling will happen in April 25, so next year. But they filed an appeal to take it back to the courts. We're waiting to hear if the appeal has been granted. And then the only other thing which might change it is if the Tory government are booted out in the general election, which is probably going to be in January. But who knows? If Labour are for it, or you know what I mean? But, it's like there's this, can we still, reverse it happening, being drilled?
And when it comes to people connecting with springs at home and water at home, or practices, what is the first step that you recommend people do? Like, if we're going to end the call, what would you say to people wanting to start their own water-based ancestral practice?
Ancestral practice, okay.
Or any or personal practice with water?
Yeah, personal practice. Okay, a lot of people say, what is the highest offering, with water? Or what is the purest water? People have that obsession as well. The purest water and the highest offering you could give to water is to bless it with all of your heart. Bless it with all your heart. You're connecting your feeling body with water, which is basically the feeling body of the planet, the communicator. Also, a simple practice is literally just to come into the present moment and touch water in a bowl or in your cup, and feeling in your body you are touching all the way back to the formation of the planet when those waters formed. That's a really stunning practice to do in itself. And then in relation to your local springs, just like get out some ordnance survey maps. I mean, if you're in the UK I can send you all the links to the Google Maps of, where they're mapped out in the UK. Go just find your local springs, have fun. It's an amazing adventure. Clear it out, give it a lot of love, give it offerings, decorate it, this is what the springs need. They need to be remembered. Get your friends involved, get community involved, make it a regular occurrence. And there's one practice I'm going to share with you if you want to clear out your local spring or a stream or a river, okay? This is so powerful, but it's so simple. Okay, just go to that body of water, whether it's a spring or a stream, and say to it, I'm going to clear you out so you can feed all life. All right. So when I say clear it out, if there's stones or rocks or rubbish in the way of, blocking its flow, just take it out. Just take it out. And when water starts to properly flow, it's like this vitality returns back to the water and the land. It loves it. It starts to sing. And then what you can do as you're clearing out the water, unblocking its flow, you can go with your own personal prayer of like, okay, water, I'm going to help you. Can you help unblock something in your life? Maybe you feel there's an illness in your body, or you feel stagnant in one part of your life. Just hold that intention. So as you're unblocking the flow of water, you're also unblocking a certain stagnancy in your life. And you do that inner outer work, and I tell you, things start to change in your life. And you're doing that in a reciprocity relationship with water. It's so simple. It sounds like child's play, but most wonderful things are from a place of playing and just reverence and being in your heart.
Oh, thank you so much, Charlotte. I've really, really, really enjoyed speaking. If anyone would like to ask Charlotte a question before we wrap up, so welcome to pop something in the chat or to raise your hand. What does water flowering mean?
Water flowering, okay, it's just a language thing of water flowering forward into the future. It's just water structuring itself. That's how I use that word to talk about water restructuring itself. It flowers forward into the future.
There's also a question around books that you recommend to read further about water and water rituals. And for the person, Miriam has written this, and I'm going to send a plug and invitation to everyone to join the course, because it's going to be an amazing first step and introduction to water-based practice, wisdoms of water, and in depth about all of the political, historical aspects that we've touched on today as well. But are there any other writers or books that you would suggest that people look into?
Let me think. I'm one of those people who doesn't read, because I had teachers who told me to go out there and experience. But there is one beautiful book written by Rosita Arvigo. I think it's like spiritual bathing practices of all cultures around the world. So rituals to do with using water for healing yourself, which I really, really love that book.
Trisha's asked if you work with water beings.
Water beings. Okay. So yeah.
Like mermaids.
Mermaids, yeah. I mean, I'm sure a lot of the women and men, mermen as well. I mean, as a 4-year-old, I just was obsessed. I wanted to be a mermaid, totally. So very, very aware of the mermaid beings. But in relation to just working with water beings, I found that different springs and especially springs, they have a different quality about them, a different essence, and it's like a consciousness. And the more you work with it, you'll start to be able to differentiate the different flavors or resonance of consciousness, like the consciousness of the red and white spring of Glastonbury is very particular to, should we say, St. Helens Spring in Hastings. Every spring has a different quality, and it's also to do with the minerals that they flow through. You know, in the soils has such a direct influence to the energy of the spring. I find iron-rich waters is so different to calcium carbonate waters. The landscape really, I find, directs the consciousness and the beings which I feel within the springs.
Thank you. There's also one of the other speakers who is joining the course called Veronica, is going to talk about this actually in more depth. She's done a big research into water beings and the much older traditional relationship with that. Veronica Strang.
Amazing. I wish I could talk more on that because it's a big topic. But yeah. That's so good that she'll be there.
So I hope that as many people who've been on the webinar can join the course and journey with us in this watery way, because I feel it's a beautiful beginning. And we start on the 28th, so in just under 2 weeks, which is very exciting. Yeah, I'm grateful that you can be part of it, and thank you for all of your amazing work.
Pleasure.
And thank you for everyone for joining.